A shy transfer student walks into the most elite math class in America. But the moment she sits down, everything changes. The professor tries to humiliate her with a calculus problem so complex no one's ever solved it on the first try. But what happened next silenced the entire lecture hall and flipped the power dynamic in just 12 minutes. Stay with me. This is a story about respect, courage, and what it really means to belong before we dive in. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if this story moves you. It was just an ordinary Thursday morning when Monica Ellison pushed open the heavy oak door of Lecture Hall 3A. The creak echoed louder than expected. Drawing a few uninterested glances her way, she hesitated, just for a moment, her fingers tightening around the fraying strap of her worn canvas backpack. The building smelled of old books and newer egos, and the ceiling stretched impossibly high above her, as if designed to remind everyone who entered that knowledge here came at a cost and only a few were deemed worthy enough to pay it. She stepped in. From the first moment, the room pulsed with a quiet arrogance. Students lounged in brand-name coats with initials stitched onto their sleeves, eyes half closed in the kind of cultivated disinterest that only the privileged seemed to perfect. Laptops were already open, screens filled with graphs, chat boxes, or the occasional online chess game. Conversations murmured through the space, not loud enough to be clear, but just enough to make an outsider feel the undeniable truth of their status. This was their place, and Monica. She wasn't part of it. She made her way down the aisle, her footsteps catching slightly on the shallow stairs, and chose a seat near the front, not too close to the board, but close enough that she wouldn't have to squint, close enough that if called on, she wouldn't have to stand. Trembling, in front of the whole room, she hoped that wouldn't happen, but deep down, she knew better. Spaces like this always noticed difference. And Monica Ellison, with her community college background, discount sneakers, and quiet intensity, was different in every way that mattered. As she sat, she took in the room with cautious eyes. The walls were lined with framed photos of past prodigies, students who had gone on to win national math Olympiads, Fulbright scholarships, think tank positions. Almost all of them were white. Almost all of them were men. None of them looked like her. Still, she opened her notebook. She had come prepared. A pencil, a backup pen, her calculator, a brain fine-tuned by years of solving problems when the stakes were much higher than a letter grade. She flipped to a clean page, wrote the date in the corner, and underlined it with purpose. Behind her, two guys were discussing the latest faculty rankings. Henshaw's still top 5, one said, "Of course." The other replied, "He's brutal, but they say if you survive his class, you can survive anything." And then, right on cue, the door swung open again, not with a creak, but with a kind of storm front authority. Dr. Henshaw had arrived. He didn't walk, he glided. Or maybe it only felt that way because everyone else seemed to stop moving when he entered. Late conversations fizzled, postures straightened. Monica felt it. Too, a subtle tightening in her chest, the kind that comes before a test you didn't know you'd be taking. He was tall, older than most faculty she'd met, with a sharp, hawk-like face and steel-gray hair swept back in a way that made him look more like an actor playing a professor than a real one. But the rumors weren't for show. Henshaw had authored 2 textbooks, led a research group funded by the Department of Defense, and once famously failed half his class just to prove a point. No one forgot his classes, and no one forgot how it felt to be on the wrong side of his expectations. He walked to the podium, placed a thick leather-bound notebook beside him, and scanned the room, not scanned sliced. His eyes moved like scalpels, dissecting the audience. Monica felt the gaze before it landed, and when it did, It didn't move on. He looked directly at her. "Miss Ellison," he said, stretching the syllables like a piece of gum he might throw away. "You're new." It wasn't a question. She nodded. "Yes, sir." His lips twitched into something that might have been a smile in another lifetime, but here felt more like the calm before a punch. "Well," he said, picking up a piece of chalk, "let's see what you've brought to the table." Without another word, he turned to the board and began writing. The chalk scraped methodically against the surface, forming a tangled mess of symbols and variables. Monica's heart thudded once hard. It was a multivariate differential equation, layered with nested limits and parametric derivatives, the kind of problem you saw in graduate qualifying exams, not week 1 of a first-year class. When he stepped aside, the board looked less like a math problem and more like a battlefield. The class shifted in their seats. Several students looked at each other, amusement dancing in their eyes. "Care to give it a try?" he said, holding the chalk out to her like a challenge. Monica didn't move at first. She could feel the weight of every glance in the room now, every sideways smirk, every unspoken, "she won't even know where to start." She stood, not quickly, not slowly, just deliberately. Her backpack sagged slightly behind her as she walked forward. Her palms itched. Her mind raced. She had solved harder problems. She had done math on train rides, in hospital waiting rooms, under flickering dorm lights with her roommate sobbing quietly nearby. She had earned her scholarship through raw performance, no legacy recommendations, no donations with strings attached. She had nothing to prove. But here, in this room, before these eyes, everything felt like it was on the line. Dr. Henshaw handed her the chalk. It was cold, smoother than she expected. "Start with the basics," he said, as if speaking to a child. "Sometimes, even the complex ones fall apart if you just take the first step." Laughter, a few chuckles from the back. Someone whispered, "This'll be fun." She ignored them. She turned to the board and breathed. The problem loomed, dense and coiled. But beneath the complexity, she saw pattern symmetries hidden in the chaos. Her fingers twitched slightly. She could start from the left, deconstruct the inner function, move step by step toward the outer derivative, or she could try something else. A shortcut, a risk, but the efficient path. She blinked once, and then the first line appeared on the board in her handwriting, then another, and another. Each stroke of chalk was steady, fluid, calculated. Behind her, the room had gone still, but she didn't hear it. She didn't hear anything but the numbers. She was somewhere else now, somewhere private, somewhere only she could go. The chalk kept moving, drawing connections others couldn't see, slicing through the assumptions baked into the way they had been taught to solve. She wasn't just answering the question. She was rewriting the approach. She was solving her way. And just before she reached the midpoint, when the final form of the solution was beginning to reveal itself, she paused just a breath, just long enough to make the room exhale with her. Then, without hesitation, she continued. She didn't know it yet, but the room would never look at her the same way again. She was no longer invisible. She was the center, and this was only the beginning. Monica had never liked mornings, but that day, the sun felt especially indifferent. It cast no warmth on her as she crossed the campus quad. Only shadows, elongated and thin like doubts she thought she'd left behind in Ohio. The air was crisp, sharp with early autumn, and the leaves cracked beneath her shoes with each step toward the building that now haunted her sleep, Hemming Hall, the math wing of Westmore University. Somewhere inside, her name was being whispered in corridors. She could feel it before she even opened the door. After the incident in Dr. Henshaw's class 2 days prior, the board, the chalk, the silence, The slow nod of reluctant approval things had shifted. She didn't know how to name the shift, only that it hummed beneath her skin like an exposed wire. When she walked into the dining hall yesterday, 3 students had stopped talking mid-sentence and stared at her. Not cruelly, not kindly either, just assessing, watching. She hadn't spoken to anyone since then, not because she didn't want to, but because everything she might have said now felt weighted. What could she say that wouldn't be dissected, reframed, repeated? She reached the tall glass doors and paused to watch her own reflection. Her face looked calm, but her stomach turned like someone had poured numbers into it and shaken them. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something older, something she'd known since childhood, the awareness of being observed, evaluated, often silently and unfairly. Monica pushed the door open. Inside the hall, the sounds were familiar footsteps against tile, the creak of old hinges, the buzz of a vending machine humming beside the staircase. But layered atop that was the new frequency half-whispers. There she is. She's the one who... No way. I heard she solved it in, 8 minutes. Monica kept her head down, her grip tightening on the worn strap of her backpack. She wanted to vanish. And at the same time, she wanted to burn, to walk through this hallway not as a curiosity, but as a storm. She made it to the differential equations lecture room earlier than usual. Only 3 students were there. One in a Cornell hoodie scribbling last-minute notes, another chewing on a pencil like it owed him money. She picked her seat again near the front different row. Same calculated distance from the board. This time, she sat taller, because this time, she knew they were watching. Dr. Cold-Parker entered quietly 5 minutes later. She wasn't teaching this class, but she walked in like she belonged. Her eyes met Monica's for a brief second and softened. Not in pity, but recognition. She gave a subtle nod before sitting in the back row again. Her presence felt intentional. And then, right at the dot of the hour, the door opened like a guillotine. Dr. Henshaw entered. Not a syllable was spoken, yet tension clung to the room like static. He didn't look at Monica this time. He looked through her, as if to say, I haven't forgotten, and neither should you. He opened the day's lecture without preamble, writing a new equation on the board. It was long, intricate, the kind of problem that needed layers peeled back like an onion dipped in abstract logic. As he scribbled, he spoke about Laplace, transforms, and boundary conditions with a rhythm that could lull someone into sleep or fear. Monica followed, took notes, underlined key substitutions, but even as her hand moved, her brain was running multiple tracks. Every movement of Henshaw's chalk was scrutinized. Was he building toward something? Was today just a lecture or another ambush? Then it happened. Before we proceed, Henshaw said, placing the chalk down, let's revisit a method rarely discussed in typical undergraduate settings, a method that, when used incorrectly, yields beautiful disasters. There was an audible shift in the room. Students sat up. He turned, glancing over the rows of faces before his eyes landed deliberately on Monica. Miss Ellison, he said, flatly. She met his gaze. Would you be so kind as to demonstrate that approach you used earlier this week? The, shortcut, if we may call it that. It was a trap. She knew it. Every student knew it. A few chairs creaked. A cough tried to hide a scoff. She stood anyway, because she didn't come here to survive. She came here to challenge gravity. As she walked to the board, she felt again the eyes, new eyes now, curious, alert, not all skeptical. Some waiting for her to fail, others just waiting to understand. That was different. She picked up the chalk without waiting for permission. Last time, she said, her voice even, I applied a transformation early to eliminate terms that would have made the problem unnecessarily complex. The principle is optimization avoiding redundancy by recognizing symmetry. Someone in the back whispered, "Wait. What symmetry?" Monica ignored the voice and began to write. This wasn't the same problem as before. It was trickier nested functions with shifting limits and hidden cancellations. But it wasn't a wall. It was a pattern. If she could find the right corner to start unraveling, the whole thing would fall into place like origami in reverse, line after line. She deconstructed the complexity. She paused only once, mid-equation, and said, "Here's where most students introduce an intermediate variable to simplify the integration. But instead, if we rotate the system using a polar substitution," the room inhaled sharply. Even Dr. Henshaw took a half step forward. By the time she reached the final line, no one spoke. Her chalk drew the final box around the solution, and then she turned around not to face the professor, but to face her peers. Sometimes, she said, "Daddy, the shortcut isn't about cutting corners. It's about seeing the path no one else thought to look for." The silence cracked with quiet murmurs. Chairs shifted. Someone clapped once before stopping. Embarrassed, but the energy had changed again. The room no longer doubted whether she belonged. Now it wondered what else she knew. Dr. Henshaw approached the board. He didn't erase it, didn't touch the chalk. Efficient. He said, unorthodox. Possibly, useful. It was the closest he'd come to praise. And then, as if to reclaim the tempo, he turned and wrote a new question on the board. This one not for Monica, for everyone. "Group assignment," he said. "Solve this by next session. 4 students per group. Your choice." He turned his back again and began erasing. The room erupted into whispering chaos. Students forming teams, pairing off with the comfort of existing alliances. Monica turned to head back to her seat alone. As always, but then a voice called out, "Ellison." Someone said. She turned. It was the Cornell hoodie guy. "You in a group yet?" She blinked. "No." He looked awkward, like the invitation cost him ego. "Want to join us?" he said, nodding toward 2 others. We figured you might have a unique angle." Monica hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because it had never happened before. She nodded. Sure. She returned to her seat, and for the first time at Westmore, her chair no longer felt like an island. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Dr. Chow Parker smile. Not widely, just enough to say, "I see what you're doing. Keep going." And Monica realized something. Respect wasn't a spotlight. It was a slow lighting of candles, one by one, in the dark, and hers had just begun to glow. The air outside the mathematics building was heavy with an impending storm. Though the skies had yet to fully darken, Monica noticed it only in passing, the low pressure brushing against her skin. The way the wind paused before it spoke, but she didn't have time to listen to the weather. Her mind was spinning with variables, people, and something more complicated than any equation change. It had only been a week since that first confrontation with Dr. Henshaw. But in that short time, Monica's world had tilted. Not dramatically, no fireworks, no standing ovation, just subtle shifts. People moved differently around her now. In the cafeteria, one student had nodded at her, not the kind of nod reserved for friends, but the kind used for recognition. In the library, someone had left a calculus book on her table with a sticky note that read, "Thought you might like this checkout, page 213. No name, no note beyond that, but it was enough to tell her she was no longer invisible. Still, visibility was a double-edged sword. With it came questions, and expectations, and quiet resentment. That morning, Monica had barely stepped into the group study room when she felt the tension. The room was supposed to be for the four of them, her, Caleb, the Cornell hoodie guy, Jasmine, a fiercely smart girl with an equally sharp tongue, and Amir, quiet, observant, usually scribbling in the margins of every textbook. They'd agreed to meet early to tackle the group assignment Henshaw had thrown at them like a bone to starving dogs. But the air in the room wasn't collaborative. It was suspicious. Caleb was already leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Monica like he'd never seen her before. Jasmine was flipping through the notes Monica had handed out the previous session. Her lips pursed in disapproval. Amir wasn't speaking. He just kept sketching equations into his notebook like the page might offer him refuge. "You really think this shortcut of yours is going to hold up?" Jasmine said without looking up. Monica blinked. "Excuse me," Jasmine set the paper down gently, like it was fragile, or like she didn't want to admit she'd been gripping it hard. "I'm saying," she repeated slowly, "that we can't base our entire solution around an approach that hasn't been validated. Just because it worked once in front of Henshaw twice," Caleb corrected. Still watching Monica, Jasmine rolled her eyes. "Fine. Twice. But that doesn't mean it'll hold up under a full theorem-based analysis. Especially not in a group submission." Monica sat down slowly. She didn't argue. Not yet. She let the silence breathe. Amir was the one who broke it. Finally looking up, "I tried reconstructing Monica's solution last night. The optimization makes sense. There's a symmetry in the nested limits that we weren't taught to look for. It's elegant." That surprised everyone, even Monica. Caleb turned to him. "You really think it'll stand in front of the TA panel?" Amir gave a small shrug. "I think it's better than what we were going to submit yesterday." Monica opened her notebook and spread out her calculations. "Look," she said, pointing to the variables. "The method I'm proposing isn't just a gimmick. It cuts through unnecessary approximations and directly applies a Fourier transform where most people would brute force the integration. We can keep the standard method as a baseline, but at least run this version alongside it." Caleb leaned forward, studying the page. "What's your confidence interval?" 97.4%, she said without missing a beat. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. "You tested it that many times," Monica said calmly, "but I've seen the pattern in enough variations to know it's not coincidence. It's structure that silenced the room. For a few minutes, they worked in tandem," Monica explained. Caleb challenged. Jasmine demanded rigor. Amir translated ideas into matrices and equations faster than anyone could follow. They weren't friends, not yet, but for the first time, Monica felt the friction of something real, a mind-to-mind tension that produced sparks, not scars. It was during one of those sparks that the door opened, and Dr. Henshaw stepped inside. The room froze. He didn't greet them, didn't even acknowledge them, just walked to the whiteboard and began writing silently. Jasmine sat up straighter. Caleb closed his laptop. Amir dropped his pen. Monica watched. The symbols formed a labyrinth, an expanded version of the group problem, now including constraints and time-based variables that hadn't been part of the original prompt. It wasn't just a problem anymore. It was a trap, a dare, without turning around. Henshaw said, "This is the real assignment." The silence was heavy. "You'll still turn in the one I gave you?" "Of course. But this one," he said, tapping the board with the end of his marker, "will determine who gets to lead the project team in next month's academic symposium." Now he turned. His eyes scanned the room again, lingering on Monica a second longer than necessary. "Unless that makes anyone uncomfortable." No one spoke. He smiled thinly. "Good. I'll expect your preliminary outline by Friday." And with that, he left. As soon as the door clicked shut, chaos resumed. "What the hell?" Caleb muttered, rubbing his temples. He just added 3 more dimensions to the model. Amir said, Already reworking the equation in his head, Jasmine groaned. This isn't a group project anymore. This is a gladiator match. Monica didn't say anything. She was still staring at the board, because something about the problem, its shape, its implications sparked something deeper. A memory, a connection. When she was 13, she'd been given a puzzle by her grandfather, an old, bent metal loop interwoven with another loop in such a way that they seemed inseparable. She had spent 3 days trying to unlock it before realizing the solution wasn't in pulling them apart, but in turning them in sync. The tension had been the illusion. She saw the same illusion here. "I think we've been approaching the function all wrong," she said softly. Caleb raised a brow. "You got a better idea?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she stood and picked up the marker Henshaw had left behind, carefully. She redrew the core function and then pivoted it on the vertical axis, mirroring the approach she had only recently theorized. The result simplified the nested function. Suddenly, layers collapsed. The noise fell away. The problem began to breathe. "No way." Amir whispered, "You just inverted the reference axis." Jasmine's lips parted, stunned. "That cancels the temporal skew, which removes the constraint entirely," Caleb added. Standing now, they watched as Monica finished the transformation. The board, once an unsolvable maze, now shimmered with logic. Still hard, still brutal, but not impossible. Not anymore. That afternoon, they submitted their preliminary outline. Monica's name was listed first. She hadn't asked for that. It just happened. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like momentum. Outside, the rain finally started. The storm didn't end that night. Rain had tapped Monica's window like it was trying to say something urgent, persistent. By morning, the glass was fogged, and the campus outside looked less like a place of learning and more like a battlefield obscured by mist. She sat at her desk, staring at her reflection in the condensation, eyes hollow from a night of little sleep. The preliminary outline had been submitted, her method now woven into the fabric of the group solution. But instead of relief, she felt a thick unease, the kind that grows in the silence after a sudden success. She knew the quiet never lasted. By the time she reached the classroom the next day, something had shifted again. The energy was off. It was in the way people didn't look at her, or looked too much, the way whispers broke off when she passed, a kind of anticipation unspoken, electric. On her desk sat a printed copy of their group outline, the one they'd submitted to Dr. Henshaw. Except someone had marked it up, red ink, aggressive, scathing, not comments for revision, but attacks, circles around her equations with notes like reckless, assumptive, amateur substitution. One line simply read not rigorous enough for publication. No name signed, no initials, just red ink and cowardice. She stared at the page for several long seconds. The classroom buzzed behind her, but it all felt distant, like she was watching it through soundproof glass. Then, carefully, she folded the paper, slipped it into her bag, and sat down. She didn't show it, not to anyone, but something inside her had shifted. Parker found her later in the hallway, standing alone at the window on the 3rd floor, watching the students move below like ants with more confidence than direction. Parker held a coffee in one hand, a folder in the other. She didn't speak at first. "I saw the markups," she said finally. Monica blinked, but didn't look away from the glass. Was it Henshaw? No. He's many things. But he signs his critiques, even the cruel ones. Monica exhaled slowly. Then, someone in the group. Parker didn't answer. But her silence said enough. After a moment, Monica turned to face her. Why are you here to make sure you don't walk away? I wasn't going to. Parker raised an eyebrow. Monica smiled bitterly. Not yet. You're in a system that doesn't always welcome outsiders, Parker said softly, and when that system is challenged from within, it retaliates. I didn't challenge it, I just solved a problem. Exactly. The conversation lingered in Monica's mind long after Parker walked away. She returned to her dorm, laid the marked-up paper on her desk, and stared at it again. She traced each red circle, each note, letting the judgment seep into her until she could feel the weight of it pushing against her spine. Then, she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started rewriting, not to correct anything, but to make it even harder to question. If they wanted rigor, she would give them rigor so airtight it could suffocate a critic. Every variable traced, every step documented. Every transformation justified not only by result, but by the deeper principle behind it. She stayed up until 3 a.m., her hand aching, her eyes blurry, and when she finally leaned back, the final equation looked like a wall of defiance, a fortress built from intellect. At the next group meeting, she said nothing about the markups. Neither did anyone else. Jasmine was unusually quiet, her gaze fixed mostly on the table. Caleb looked at Monica more than he should have, and Amir kept fidgeting with his pen. No one claimed responsibility. Monica didn't ask. She just handed them her updated work and explained her improvements with precision. And that's when it happened. Caleb said, This is brilliant." Amir nodded. "It simplifies everything without compromising proof structure." Even Jasmine, reluctantly, murmured, "We should lead with this." Monica said nothing. She didn't need to. Respect wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The following Monday, they stood before the internal review panel, a mix of professors, graduate students, and guest faculty, who would determine whether their solution would represent the department at the symposium. Monica hadn't planned to speak. Caleb had rehearsed a short summary. Amir would walk them through the structure, and Jasmine would close with the implications. But just before the presentation began, Jasmine turned to her and whispered, "You should be the one to explain the core approach." Monica hesitated. Jasmine didn't look at her, just whispered, "It's yours. Own it." So Monica stepped forward when her name wasn't called, took the laser pointer, and stood before a half-circle of people waiting to poke holes in everything she'd done. She spoke clearly, not just with knowledge, but with certainty. She didn't defend. She taught. She showed them how traditional models introduced inefficiencies, how her inversion approach didn't cut corners but redefined the route entirely, drawing from advanced optimization techniques normally reserved for postgraduate research. Halfway through, one of the graduate advisors asked, "But wouldn't this break under time-sensitive constraints in a multi-agent environment?" Monica smiled. "Only if you're solving it in real time. But this approach is designed for pre-processing scenarios. The time sensitivity dissolves once you understand the temporal independence in the coefficient distribution." A pause, then a nod. At the end, no one clapped. That wasn't the setting for it. But one of the guest faculty leaned over and said quietly to the chair, "That method, has she published it?" The chair shook his head. "She should." They left the room without any guarantees. That's how these things worked. No answers until decisions were formalized. But in the hallway, their group felt lighter. Amir actually smiled. Caleb offered a fist bump Monica didn't expect. Jasmine, walking beside her, said under her breath, "Next time someone questions your work, hand them a calculator and ask them to catch up." It was the closest thing to affection Jasmine had ever offered. Later that evening, Monica walked alone across the quad. The storm had passed, but the grass was still wet, the sky freshly scrubbed. Lights from the academic buildings reflected off puddles like stars pretending to live in water. She found a bench near the central fountain and sat down, pulled out her phone. A message blinked at the top. Jordan. Any update? Monica typed back. We presented. No verdict yet. I think it went well. 3 dots danced. Then, Jordan, you think, or, you know. She smiled. Maybe I finally know. Then another message popped up. This one unexpected. Unknown number doctor. Parker shared your method with a colleague at MIT. They want to talk. Monica stared at the screen. Stunned. She read it again and again. Somewhere deep inside her, something long dormant stirred. Not ambition. That had always been there. But belief. A belief that maybe the world was finally beginning to hear her. Not just tolerate her, but listen. And the funny thing was, she wasn't done speaking. The email arrived just after midnight. Monica had been lying in bed, the glow of her laptop dimming with each passing minute as she reread notes from their presentation, trying to soothe the unease that came after high-stakes performances, the kind where you couldn't tell if silence afterward was reverence or rejection. She saw the notification blink across her screen. Subject inquiry regarding your recent optimization method. From Dr. Liang to MIT, Edu. She sat up instantly, the blanket sliding to the floor. Her heart began to race. Not from excitement, but from the old reflex that came any time something big appeared in her life, uninvited. Opportunities, in her experience, rarely came without strings. She opened the message. Dear Ms. Ellison, I was recently shown your outlined inversion model and Fourier-based optimization applied to time-sensitive boundary functions in multivariable calculus. I must admit, the elegance of the transformation and its applied simplicity is unusual for work at the undergraduate level. Would you be open to discussing your framework in a brief call this week? We're evaluating methods for integration into one of our applied systems modeling research tracks. And I believe your insight could be valuable. Warm regards. Dr. Peter Liang. MIT Mathematics Department. She read it twice, then a third time, then clicked star to mark it, and still didn't move. The room felt suddenly too small, too quiet. Her mind swam with 1,000 conflicting currents. Did this mean legitimacy, or just more eyes waiting to pick her apart? Would this become another moment where people questioned if she'd done the work herself? Another lecture where her voice would be met with silence until someone older, someone whiter, validated her thoughts. But then something inside her settled slow, quiet, like a hand placed firmly on her back. She replied, Dear Dr. Liang, thank you for your kind words. I'd be honored to speak further. I'm available Wednesday or Friday between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. EST. Please let me know what works best for you. Regards, Monica Ellison. The cursor blinked back at her for a moment before she hit send. When the message disappeared into the ether, a strange calm followed. Not confidence, but clarity. She wasn't here by accident. By morning. The air on campus was colder, sharp in the way early November tended to be. Leaves crunched underfoot, and students moved quickly between buildings, coats pulled tight, coffee cups steaming. Monica walked with her headphones in. Though no music played, it was just a habit now, an invisible barrier, a way to mark the difference between being present and being accessible. She arrived at Hemming Hall 10 minutes early, inside the lecture room. The hum of academic fatigue lingered. Midterms were over. But the symposium prep had everyone stretched thin. Her team was already gathered at their usual spot, except this time, something felt off. Jasmine was pacing. Caleb sat stiffly, a frown carved into his face. Amir looked unusually tense, his eyes glued to a text on his phone. What happened? Monica asked. Pulling out a chair, Jasmine didn't answer immediately. Caleb did. We didn't get it. Monica blinked. What? The symposium slot. Amir clarified. They gave it to Levin's group. Monica tried to keep her face neutral. Did they say why Jasmine scoffed? They said our method was theoretically innovative, but lacked sufficient precedent to merit departmental representation at this level. Caleb added bitterly. Translation, we made them uncomfortable. Monica's stomach dropped. Not out of surprise, but out of recognition. She had prepared herself for this possibility. She just hadn't expected the rejection to arrive with such polished courtesy. I'm sorry, she said softly. No? Jasmine replied. Turning to her, eyes sharper than usual, don't apologize. You did everything right. They just didn't like where it came from. Amir closed his notebook. We submitted a better solution. Everyone knows it. They just weren't ready to admit it out loud. Caleb muttered. The group dissolved soon after. No one wanted to linger. No one had the energy to fake optimism. Monica stayed behind, alone in the room, staring at the whiteboard still covered with faint traces of their work, as she began erasing it slowly, methodically. The door creaked behind her. She didn't turn. I was expecting you, she said. Doctor. Henshaw's voice was low. You've become difficult to ignore. She turned now. Meeting his gaze, you made it very clear I wasn't meant to be the story. He didn't deny it. Levin's group was safer. Their method is in line with standard academic expectations, and yet ours was better. Perhaps, but politics isn't always about accuracy. She stared at him for a moment. Why are you here? He took a long breath, as though preparing to say something he didn't want to say. You forced a conversation the department wasn't ready to have. That's not a failure. It feels like one. It isn't, he said. It's a beginning. She wasn't sure whether to laugh or call him a hypocrite. Is this your version of an apology? No, he said flatly. It's an acknowledgement. And somehow, that felt heavier. Later that night, Monica sat on the roof of her dorm, something she wasn't technically allowed to do, but did anyway. She liked it up there. It was quiet, removed. She could look down at the campus and see everything for what it was, a place that both welcomed and rejected her at the same time. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. New email from Dr. Liang at MIT. He due Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. Works perfectly. Looking forward to hearing more about your model. She smiled, because rejection by one institution didn't mean rejection by all, and some doors didn't open. They were pushed, or kicked, by morning. She would write a full formal abstract of her method, polish every detail, prepare her notes. She would walk into that call not as a student seeking approval, but as a peer offering insight. Let them question her. Let them challenge her. She was done playing small, because sometimes the most revolutionary thing you could do wasn't proving people wrong. It was proving yourself right and not needing their permission to do it. The morning of the MIT call was quiet. Too quiet. Not in the calm before the storm way, but in the way that made Monica hyper-aware of every sound her own breathing. The tick of her dorm wall clock. The faint rustle of papers on her desk. Her laptop sat open in front of her. A neat slideshow prepared with annotated formulas, graphical models, and a detailed breakdown of her inversion method. Everything was sharp, minimal, intentional, no fluff, no hedging. She'd spent the past 2 nights refining it less like a student cramming for a test, more like an architect obsessing over every beam before letting anyone step inside. She hadn't even told her team about the meeting. Not out of secrecy, but because it felt like something separate, something that belonged to her, and her alone. For once, she wasn't solving a problem for a grade, or a spotlight, or even respect. She was showing her work to someone who might actually understand the language she'd been speaking into the void. The call connected at exactly 10:30. Dr. Ba Peter Lang's face appeared on screen, sharp features, silver temples, a tired but curious gaze that carried years of academic scrutiny behind it. "Good morning, Ms. Ellison," he said, his tone professional but not cold. "Thanks for making the time." Monica nodded, adjusting slightly in her seat. "Thank you for reaching out." He got straight to the point. "I've reviewed your notes, and I must say, it's been a while since something from an undergraduate submission made me pause. I'm particularly interested in the optimization segment you applied to the time-dependent functions. Do you mind walking me through your logic on that?" She began, calmly, deliberately, starting with her original assumptions, then guiding him through the structure, how she identified recurring patterns in coefficient behavior, and how she leveraged inversion to strip away redundancies most models were built to tolerate. It took her exactly 8 minutes to reach the core transformation, during which Liang took no notes, only listened. When she finished, he leaned back slightly. "Where did you learn to approach problems like this?" he asked. It wasn't the question she expected. She hesitated. "Nowhere. Really, I got tired of taking the long way around problems when I could see the answer forming before the method caught up. So I started experimenting with how to get there faster, cleaner, no mentor, no graduate-level coursework." She shook her head. "Just lots of mistakes. And insomnia." A smile crept across his face. Not mocking, but intrigued. "Insomnia and intuition. Dangerous combination." Then, more seriously, "You've got something here. It's unconventional, and it'll need peer review. But the logic holds. I'd like to introduce your work to the modeling department at MIT. Would you be open to joining a research cohort as a guest contributor for the upcoming spring term?" The air left her lungs like a soft collapse. I'd be honored." She managed. "Good. Let's keep in touch. I'll forward the documentation. Congratulations, Mrs. Ellison." And just like that, the call ended. She sat motionless for several minutes after, staring at the black screen where his face had been. There were no fireworks, no dramatic music, just the soft hum of her computer and the quiet realization that she had just been invited into a room most people spent years trying to find the door to. Her phone buzzed. It was Caleb. "Caleb. Can you meet us at the lab? There's something you should see." Still riding the tail of the MIT call, she grabbed her coat and went. The air outside was biting, and the sidewalks were slick with frost that hadn't fully melted. She reached the lab in 10 minutes. Cheeks flushed from cold, breath visible in short puffs. Inside, the lights were already on and the door slightly ajar. Jasmine, Amir, and Caleb stood huddled around one of the projection screens, their backs to her. She stepped in. "What's going on?" she asked. They parted slightly to let her see. On the screen was a forwarded email. The subject line read, "Departmental Symposium Update Revised Guidelines." Caleb looked at her. "They're reopening the submission process." What Monica stepped closer, Jasmine nodded, jaw tight. Apparently, the symposium committee received an anonymous complaint about bias in the original selection process. They're reviewing all proposals again. Everyone gets one chance to revise and resubmit. "Do you think it was Parker?" Monica asked. "Probably," Amir said, "but she's too careful to leave fingerprints." Caleb smirked. "Whoever did it just cracked open the system from the inside." Monica stared at the email, mind racing. It was more than a second chance. It was a crack in the wall she thought was immovable. "We don't need to start over," she said. "We just need to sharpen what we already have." Jasmine crossed her arms. "We've got 48 hours. Then we make it count." The next 2 days were chaos, but the good kind. The kind where everyone was running on caffeine, adrenaline, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this time it would be different. Monica worked through the night, refining their graphical interpretations, aligning each theoretical component with real-world applications, embedding footnotes referencing published studies to bolster legitimacy. Caleb translated technical jargon into clean executive summaries. Jasmine rewrote their introduction to center clarity over complexity. Amir ran test simulations of their model on Westmore's limited computing clusters. It wasn't perfect, but it was powerful. On the night of the submission, Monica sat alone in the lab after the others had left, staring at the final slide of their deck. It wasn't just math anymore, it was a statement. That rigor didn't always look the way people expected. That brilliance didn't have to come wrapped in tradition. That a girl from a community college in Ohio could write something bold enough to unsettle a room full of tenured minds. She clicked submit, and this time, when she closed her laptop, she didn't feel like she had to brace for impact. She felt ready. The next morning, word spread fast. They'd been accepted. The revised proposal was chosen to lead the first academic panel of the symposium. It wasn't just inclusion, it was recognition. She arrived at Hemming Hall that afternoon and paused at the door before entering. Inside, students whispered, glanced, but it was different now. There was no mocking in their eyes, no smug curiosity. What she saw was interest, respect, and in a few faces, something closer to awe. She walked in. Shoulders back, Dr. Sam Henshaw stood at the podium, eyes fixed on the folder in front of him. He looked up briefly as she entered. Their eyes met. He nodded once, just once, but it was enough. She took her seat, and for the first time, the room didn't shrink around her. It expanded, because she wasn't just in the room, she was shaping it. The morning of the symposium felt unreal, like Monica was walking through a dream she hadn't dared to fully imagine. Campus was unusually still. The quiet, not from absence, but from anticipation. Hemming Hall had been transformed overnight. Banners hung above the arched entrance, reading Westmore Academic Symposium, Mathematics and Innovation. Inside, student volunteers rushed around with tablets, name badges, and coffee trays. Professors moved like generals, some with clipboards, others simply scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Monica adjusted the strap of her black blazer and took a steadying breath outside the auditorium door. She hadn't slept. Not from nerves, but from preparation, reviewing every line, rerunning every simulation, memorizing the logical threads so tightly that even if a panelist tried to pull one loose, it would only snap back stronger. Her team was already inside, securing their place near the projector. She stood apart for one more moment. She wasn't the same girl who walked into that lecture hall weeks ago, gripping a backpack like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Something had changed since then. Subtle, unannounced, but irreversible. It was in the way she held her own gaze in the bathroom mirror this morning. She wasn't trying to belong anymore. She already did. She stepped inside. The auditorium buzzed with hushed voices. Students, faculty, and visiting researchers filled every row. At the front, a row of distinguished panelists sat behind a long table. Burr Santos from Caltech, Professor Renfield from Princeton, and Westmore's own doctor, Levine, head of applied mathematics, and just off to the side sat Dr. Henshaw, leaning back with a face carved from stone, watching everything but saying nothing. The first group went up, a clean, rehearsed presentation on stochastic modeling and environmental systems, well-structured, polite, and wholly expected. Then another, analyzing linear elasticity and material stress testing. Strong work, but it landed without a ripple. Then they called Monica's team. Group D4, presenting a non-traditional inversion method in temporal optimization. As they approached the stage, the room dimmed. Monica's hands didn't tremble. She stood center stage, flanked by Caleb, Jasmine, and Amir, each carrying a quiet confidence she had watched grow over the past weeks. Jasmine handled the opening. Caleb transitioned into problem framing. Amir walked the room through the simulation benchmarks. Then Monica stepped forward. This was the moment they had either been waiting for or trying to delay. She wasn't sure which. Her voice was clear from the first sentence. We approach this problem from a frustration, one born not of inability, but of inefficiency. Traditional models often accept process friction as a necessary evil. We asked, what if we didn't? She began with the original equation and then unfolded it layer by layer, showing the embedded redundancies in most existing solutions. Then she introduced the inversion method not as rebellion, but as an inevitability when viewed from the right lens. Her diagrams pulsed on the screen behind her, minimalist but impactful. Her logic flowed like water unbroken, smooth, and cold enough to make people sit up. When she reached the section labeled temporal skew correction, a hush fell over the panelists. She glanced at them and said, "This step is often considered optional in undergraduate modeling. But we'd argue it's essential if we care not just about solution accuracy, but efficiency, especially in fields where milliseconds matter." One of the panelists, Professor Renfield, interrupted. "Forgive me this technique you're applying. The early-stage Fourier mirror isn't that derived from graduate-level fluid dynamics." Monica nodded. "Yes, sir, but we found it adaptable here when used outside its typical context. In our case, it resolved time compression artifacts in under 40% of the computational cycles compared to baseline models." Another panelist leaned forward. "And this was your idea." She didn't blink. "Yes, it was. The silence that followed was the kind that made your heartbeat feel loud, but no one challenged her further." She continued, closing the presentation with one final slide, a graph comparing the runtime performance of traditional versus inverted methods, her method a difference too wide to ignore. The lights rose slowly. For a moment, the panel simply stared. Then, Santos leaned into his microphone and said, "This was not what we expected, but it is precisely what we came to find." And just like that, the room stirred. Not in loud applause, this wasn't a high school debate, but in murmurs, sideways glances, scribbling pens, the academic version of astonishment. They stepped off stage. Jasmine exhaled for the first time in 20 minutes. Caleb clapped Monica lightly on the shoulder. Amir simply gave a nod, brief, but deeply satisfied. As they exited into the corridor, Monica caught a glimpse of Dr. Parker standing by the side wall, arms crossed, a knowing smile blooming on her face. No words were exchanged, none were needed, but there was still one thing left. Later that afternoon, after the symposium wound down and most of the crowd had scattered, Monica returned to the now empty lecture hall. She needed a moment with the space where it had all started, the same chalkboard where she had first stood alone, the same rows of seats where whispers had once followed her every move. Dr. Henshaw was there. Of course. Gathering his things in slow, deliberate motions, Monica hesitated at the threshold. He didn't look up when he spoke. "You turned a shortcut into a standard." She approached slowly. That was never the goal. No, but it might be the outcome. He finally looked at her, not with disdain, not with condescension, but with a quiet, resigned respect. "You know," he said, "this institution was built on rules designed to keep certain people out." Monica held his gaze. "And you enforce those rules." "I did," he said, "until I couldn't." A pause. "I won't pretend I made this easy for you." "You didn't." She agreed. "But you didn't need easy." "No," she said, a small smile forming. "I just needed space." He gave a faint nod. "You carved it for yourself." She turned to leave. but paused at the door. "Dr. Henshaw," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The next Monica that walks into your class, will you make her carve it too?" He didn't answer, and she didn't wait. That night, Monica walked across campus under the glow of old lanterns and bare trees, their limbs clawing into the November sky. She didn't check her phone. She didn't respond to the string of messages congratulating her. She didn't need external proof anymore. The shift had already happened, and it hadn't been just for her. She thought about the girl who might sit in her seat next semester, the one who'd carry her own method, her own voice, her own war with invisibility. And she knew now when that girl arrived, the room would feel different, because Monica had changed it, and once a room has been cracked open, it never closes the same way again. The first snow of the season fell the following week, quiet and unassuming. Flakes drifted down like ash from a fire long since burned out, covering the campus in soft white. Monica stood beneath a bare oak tree near the edge of the quad, hands in her coat pockets, watching students trudge past hoods pulled tight, boots crunching against frost-covered sidewalks. A group of freshmen ran laughing through the flurries, one of them slipping, the others roaring in approval. For the first time in a long time, she smiled without thinking about who might be watching. The symposium had come and gone, but the ripples it left behind had only started to spread. An email from the dean's office went out the day after a formal commendation of her team's presentation, along with a note that Monica Ellison would be featured in the university's Winter Research Journal. Her inbox had been flooded with requests, students asking for copies of the model, faculty hoping to discuss ideas, and one department chair from Stanford inviting her to consider summer research collaboration. But none of it felt as loud as the silence she carried inside, the silence that had once been filled with doubt, now echoing with something closer to peace. Dr. Teto Parker met her for coffee the day before finals. They sat in a corner of the campus cafe, steam rising from their mugs, the clink of ceramic a quiet counterpoint to the snow tapping at the window. "I spoke to Liang again," Parker said, stirring her coffee. "He thinks your method could be integrated into real-time systems within 18 months. Wants you on the project in January." Monica nodded, not surprised. "He already sent the contract. I'm reviewing it with Jordan." Parker raised an eyebrow. "Jordan? My best friend? Law school. I trust him. Smart." They sat in silence for a moment. "You've shaken this place," Parker said finally. "You realize that, right?" Monica looked out the window. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to survive it." "Exactly. And in doing so, you forced it to make room for someone like you." The words sank in slow, like snowmelt into soil. She wasn't sure what to say. She had spent so long trying not to be erased that the idea of being seen still felt foreign. Parker smiled gently. "What happens next?" Monica shrugged. But there was a glint in her eyes. Spring term. Liang's lab. Maybe more publishing. Maybe fewer people asking who did my math for me. Parker leaned forward. "And what about here?" Monica hesitated. "Honestly, I'm not sure. I don't know if I stay long-term, but I want to make sure this department remembers what happened. I want the next transfer student to walk into Henshaw's class and not see a wall. You already started that." Parker said. They left the cafe an hour later, their breath turning to fog in the cold. Monica paused outside, her boots sinking slightly into the fresh snow. She looked at Parker. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For not fixing it for me? Just for seeing me?" Parker didn't respond right away. Then, "That's all most people ever need." As winter break approached, Monica spent her days tying up loose ends. Her group's full research paper was accepted into the regional undergraduate mathematics journal. She finalized her role in Liang's cohort. She even received an invitation to speak at Westmore's Women in STEM luncheon in the spring. But none of that was what stayed with her. What stayed with her was a Tuesday afternoon in an empty lecture hall. She hadn't meant to go back, but her legs had carried her there without permission. And before she knew it, she was standing in front of the same chalkboard where everything had begun. The board had been erased, but faint ghosts of equations still lingered. She walked to the center, picked up a piece of chalk, and wrote a single line across it. You don't have to wait for permission. She capped the chalk, set it down, and left the message there, not for her, for whoever would come next. 3 days later, she received a letter in her campus mailbox, an envelope with no return address. Thick parchment, carefully folded. She opened it slowly. Inside was a short note. Monica, I was in the audience during your symposium presentation. I've been sitting in that same lecture hall for 2 years, waiting to feel like I deserved to be there. Watching you speak changed that. You didn't just present math. You dismantled something most of us never thought could be challenged. Thank you. A girl in the 3rd row, quietly taking notes. Monica read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her notebook. Between 2 pages of diagrams, she would keep it, not as proof, but as reminder. Finals week passed like a blur. Long nights, empty libraries, the low hum of exhausted ambition. She turned in her last paper 2 days before the break and spent the evening walking the campus alone. Snow crunching beneath her boots, lamplight glinting off icy branches. She paused at the top of the hill overlooking the library steps. The whole of Westmore spread out before her. It looked different now, not smaller, but more open. The gates that had once felt like barriers now resembled thresholds, ones she had crossed, reshaped, and left a little more ajar. Her phone buzzed. It was Jordan. Jordan. So when are you telling Mom about MIT? Monica laughed to herself and typed back, maybe when I visit for Christmas, or when I send her a photo from Cambridge. Jordan. Just make sure you send one where you're smiling like you own the place. She thought about that for a moment, then replied, I don't have to smile to own it. I just have to walk in like I built it. No reply came right away, but she knew Jordan was grinning on the other side. That night, before heading back to her dorm, Monica made one last stop. Henshaw's office. The door was open. He sat behind his desk, glasses on, leafing through a manuscript. She knocked. He looked up. Ms. Ellison, just wanted to say goodbye before the break. He nodded. I read your journal submission. She waited. You still overuse assumptions, he said, setting the paper down, but the logic is, irritatingly sound. Monica smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. He leaned back, appraising her. You'll go far, not because you're brilliant, though you are, but because you didn't wait for the system to validate you. You made it acknowledge you. I learned from the best, she said dryly. He chuckled. A rare sound. I doubt that. She turned to go. Ellison. He called after her. She stopped at the door. Don't just change rooms, he said. Change the blueprints. She nodded once, then left. Outside, the snow had begun falling again. Soft and endless, the campus lights glowed beneath it, and the path ahead stretched wide and white. She walked toward it, not faster, not slower, just forward, because respect wasn't something you waited for. It was something you demanded, and sometimes it was something you rewrote from the inside out.